So let's talk about Close-Eye Misunderstanding. This was probably, at least one of my favorites, and I think it's one of your greatest plays. It comes from the Beatles song "Strawberry Fields Forever," correct?
Yeah.
And then, but the thing with this play is it's interesting. You use Arthur Godfrey in here, and at first, I think most audiences or readers won't know what the hell is going on with these Arthur Godfrey inserts, but they cohere eventually, where eventually it's revealed that perhaps a lot of the drama is going within Arthur Godfrey's mind. And even when it's revealed that it's not so, the way that Arthur Godfrey is contrasted against the Paulette and Dennis characters, as well as Danny Wagner, works very well. So talking about the mechanics of that play, it's 8 scenes, and the Arthur Godfrey sections, he's characterized in a very interesting fashion in that he has little lies that come in, little gambits that are revealed as not necessarily true, that you have to be paying attention to or you won't catch them.
Yeah, this is a play that I initially had a different title for. I was going to call it Another Monkey Off the Vine, and in fact, in the play that precedes it, I said my next play is going to be called Another Monkey Off the Vine, and I decided at maybe 3/4 of the way into this play, in terms of drafts, that no, that didn't work, and so because I had the Cuda Bucks thing. And Cuda Bucks, you'll find a lot of the characters here, just like in my novels. If you look up Cuda Bucks, he was a real life magician in the 1950s and 60s, and he pretended he could see, and it just, the title fit better. Eyes closed, misunderstanding all you see, and so who does that refer to? We get the. One of the things that I wanted to do with this play, that I'll do in some other plays here and there too, is I've got what I call sidebar scenes. If you remember the very first play I wrote, I have scenes with, say, Valerie Vavello and her girlfriend, and I have scenes with Megan Morrow and her gay black theater buddy, and they don't contribute necessarily to the lowest common denominator plot of those plays. But they're sidebar things that give you into the characters, so the characters are important. Well, right here, I start off with a very sidebar moment, but it's a sidebar thing that comes out of nowhere. It's like, it's sort of like, I don't know, have you ever seen Nights of Cabiria, the Fellini film?
No, I've never seen it yet.
In that film, the character, Fellini's wife, whose name slips my mind now, Giulietta Messina, there's a scene where she's put under, she's hypnotized by this guy and made to do some silly things, and people laugh at her and whatnot. So I said, the base of this play is based on real life too. This woman, her real name was similar to Paulette, and she was killed, and two of her family members were killed in the same way in less than 2 years. And I said, that's interesting, but that her death was far more interesting than her life. She was this typically kind of foul-mouthed New Yorker, and I knew her brother from one summer. He worked at the Fi Nast or Fi Fest store, as they call it in this universe. But I wanted to put it different. So we get this scene, and I think I wrote about myself how when I was a kid, I once exposed this magician. I exposed all of his tricks except one I couldn't explain, and he put me in my place when I was like 12 or 13. So I wanted to have this Cuda Bucks guy who was pretending he could see and read stuff, and I had the main character, the focal character of Paulette, basically goes up there, and she's being her rowdy self, and she basically, at the end of his act, she's like, well, if you can't see what's on the chalkboard, why do you have to face it? Because apparently in real life, the real Cuda Bucks could manipulate this dough that he had underneath this gauze and see through the gauze. And so that sets up the idea of people, what is real, what can we really see about each other? And one of the things, this is my second shortest play. It's only 100 words longer than my Tetramal play, Persuasion Gentler, about that. and this was a play that was really compressed. And again, uh, I wanted to get away from that compression, so the next play is 40,000. That sets up the thing, and then we go right from the Coup de Bucks Paulette magic act. We then go into Arthur Godfrey. And Arthur Godfrey was one of the most famous entertainers in America in the middle of the 20th century, both on radio and television. I mean, he made millions. He was beloved, and we get we get these scenes that aren't really that long of him just monologuing about who he is, and it's almost like they're culled from a one-man show about himself. So he does this monologue about himself, and then we get back and forth between the monologue and uh, between the scenes at the funeral parlors. And Danny Wagner ends up showing up at the funeral parlors that of these various people, and the only one that ends up seeing him is Denny, the brother, the one surviving family of the Montuna family, member of the Montuna family.
Yeah, and he interacts only with Denny, I suppose, doesn't he?
I believe.
And he also interacts with Godfrey at the end.
Yeah, at the end, all the men are interacting. Kuda Bucks, his assistant, Danny, Godfrey, Denny. And speaking of, I just mentioned, uh, just to talk how it is. If you look at the ending of the play, that's a direct steal from Waiting for Godot, but mine's a much better play.
It's a direct steal, the entirety of the ending?
The last 2 or 3 lines, well, then let's go. Yes, let's go. Well, it's not a direct steal. It's a paraphrase, and then it ends. The lights fade before they can move. But again, this I don't know. I don't think this is one of the few plays. I don't think I use a poem in here. No, I use some clips from a newspaper, but I don't think I use a poem in here. No, I don't. So
But Denny
yeah.
is afflicted with first sister dying, then his wife, then Paulette. But we never see. Do we see Paulette's death?
No, it's the brother. His brother dies, then his wife, then his sister. We only hear about what happens at the funeral parlors, and he's there are some wraithic characters that he's interacting with, just like in our town, but they go off and whatnot, and they are, again, since they're all sort of the funerals here, they are plays off of each other, reworks, adumbrations.
Did you initially start off with the idea of Arthur Godfrey sort of monologuing in these one-man shows to himself, and then tie them in together with this whole meta idea that perhaps the play is within his own mind, or within a dream, isn't it? That he dreams about these people?
That's an interesting interpretation. I had nothing about that. It's interesting that you would interpret it that way. But I mean, it's probably a plausible interpretation. I'll see what Chin or some other people might say about that. Again, it's one of these things. Who is the play about, and what is the title? And then if you look at, I not only have the title, but
did you ever see Saint Elsewhere?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's that famous ending where the Down syndrome child has the snow globe in his hand. He puts it on the mantle, and we zoom up, and then we see the Saint Elsewhere hospital there. That's sort of what it reminded me of, in a sense, that there's the snow globe of Arthur Godfrey, this world that's within him, and then but the ending may be a kibosh upon that interpretation, in that now he's out there with the three of them interacting together, and it could have just been a red herring. Then you have this sort of absurdist ending where they're going to a place that we don't know where they're going to.
Well, one of the things that's interesting, if you look, and this is one of these things where I sort of reserve the right to not explain everything, and the ending is one of the more poetic endings. Not only, excuse me, do I paraphrase Godot, but there's the ending where Kuda Bucks comes back with his assistant, and this time he doesn't put the dough and the gauze and whatnot on his face, and his assistant leads him in front of Godfrey and Danny Wagner, and he looks at him and says, "I see Danny Wagner, I see Denny Montuna, I see Arthur Godfrey," and he acts as if this act of seeing is some kind of magic act, even though he's just looking at them, and that gets to back to the Strawberry Fields title and quote about what is reality and what is seeing really about. I mean, the quote here, the epigraph: "No one, I think, is in my tree. I mean, it must be high or low. That is, you can't, tune in, but it's all right. That is, I think it's not too bad." So this gets that references the famous 1960s quote about turning off, tuning in, dropping out, whatever it was. Uh, uh, what is reality, and how do we tune into it? And why is this mediocre illusionist Kuda Bucks? Why is he goes from being offended in the first scene with Paulette, that Paulette is exposing his trick, seemingly. He's offended. To the end, he's dropped all pretense that he's doing anything magical. He's just looking at people and pretending. And presumably the crowd is, the stagehands appear and hold up applause signs, and applause is given. So we get this bizarre ending where the magician isn't doing anything magical. He's not even having the pretense of doing magic, and yet he's wanting the applause. And so there are symbolic things that can be read into this thing. Is Arthur Godfrey, for example, was an entertainer, so he can resonate with that. Is Danny Montuna, is Danny Wagner, as the author presumed of this play within his universe, to what degree are they preening for the stage, since they clearly know by the end that they are on stage to a certain degree?
What do you think of the Arthur Godfrey inserts, in the sense that he sort of reveals himself as a bullshitter for the most part too? Maybe it comes from his entertainment background, but he's talking about his endorsements of cigars and how once he realized that they were poison, he still endorsed them, but but he also openly criticized them. He's a paid hypocrite in a sense.
Yeah, and that's taken from the reality. The Godfrey character, in a sense, is not that important in the sense that I guess I could have used just about any celebrity, but I tried to tie the Godfrey character in, since he was based in New York, as a distant relative to the Montuna family. Was sort of the black sheep of the Arthur Godfrey clan, and so there's some distant relationship between them. We hear about some kind of strife between the two halves of the family decades earlier. But again, that's more than likely just stuff tossed out there to give intrigue. It's really just more an existential play, and I think the symbolism and the repetition and the constant uh, use of Danny Wagner as both a wraith and also as presumably the narrator or de facto writer of the play. This is a play that really hits it well.
Do you think Denny eventually emerges as the main character too?
Possibly. I mean, I don't know if there's.
Because Paulette seems like a more overwhelming presence compared to Denny.
Well, yeah, and that's why she's gone. She's over the top, and since the real life Paulette was killed like that, she had to die in the play. So this is actually one of the few plays. There's only maybe 2 or 3 plays where the males dominate. This is one of them. The Henry Miller play, These Lesser Weathers of Beethoven, and also the Persuasion Gentler. And then the one with the brief candles with a lot of the boys. So this play stands out in that one sense too, because it's not female dominated.
Okay, one last question before we go to, unless you have something more to say about this play.
Go ahead.
But you forwarded around your thoughts about sort of the coming plays that you're going to be writing. You said that it sort of starts off with this one, in the sense that you were using poem projections and music as a way to test the mechanics of drama. But your plays going forward will mostly be concerned with the emotion of the characters and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Speak a little bit about that. What is this play a harbinger of?
Well, this is one you haven't read yet, apparently, A Remembered Field, and this is my fourth longest play. It's like 41,000 words, so that would probably play out at 3+ hours on stage. And the thing is, I wanted to, like I said, in the last 6 or 7 plays before that, and even going back to An Eye Other Than Human, or The Honey of Common Summer, I found myself trying. I wouldn't say taking shortcuts, but I wanted to get back more to doing some works that are longer, even if they're not longer in terms of being 40,000 words, even if it's 25 or 30,000 words, being more concentrated on the words and how people communicate. And that doesn't mean that I wouldn't use, a classical music piece, or a public domain image, or something like that, or text scrolling. I may, but it's not going to be used as dramatic, because I've shown that I can do that. So these first 27 plays were sort of like my opening up my palette, and whatnot. So with these ones, I want to not get more traditional necessarily, but really push the boundaries of the way people speak, people's dialogue, people's conversations, much in the way that I did with the Vincetti brothers, and the whole total immersion kind of thing with the novels.